when the silent empath turns cold? Something within the fabric of the psyche shifts so profoundly that those who once fed on its warmth are shaken to their very core. I want you to imagine for a moment that the empath is like a quiet well hidden in a forest. Its water, clear and still. Many have come to drink from it without ever asking who maintains its purity. They assumed the water would always be there, endless, forgiving, abundant. But when the well freezes, when silence turns into an impenetrable frost, those who relied on its generosity are forced to confront their own thirst, their own hunger, and ultimately their own reflection in the eyes. This, my friends, is the moment when the mirror appears, and it is a mirror the narcissist fears above all else. The empath has often been described as a soul who absorbs the pain of others, who feels the suffering in rooms where no words are spoken, who notices the tremor beneath the laughter and the wound beneath the mask. But empathy, when unchecked, becomes a kind of servitude to the unconscious needs of those around them. The empath does not simply feel. The empath contains. They become a vessel for projections, shadows, un désir. To the narcissist, the empath is both a stage and an audience, a source of energy to amplify the performance of their full self. But what the narcissist fails to realize is that the empath, through silence and observation, has been gathering knowledge. The empath has become a silent witness to archetypal patterns playing out, a recorder of shadows dancing on the wall of the collective unconscious. When they turn cold, they no longer collude with the illusion, they reveal it. The coldness of the silent empath is not cruelty, it is revelation. It is the sudden absence of emotional currency that once sustained the illusion of power in the other. Imagine a narcissist standing before a mirror that no longer flatters, that no longer bends light to hide blemishes, but instead shows the exact truth of what is. That mirror is unbearable, for the narcissist thrives on distortion, on convincing themselves and others that the mask is the face. When the empath refuses to reflect back the grandiosity, when their silence becomes a refusal to feed the false image, the narcissist is undone. They are left staring into the abyss of their own emptiness. And so, the empath's coldness becomes not a weapon, but a revelation of reality. In the language of symbols, this transformation can be likened to the alchemical process. The empath begins as the vessel, the container, the prima materia that receives the chaos of others. But through the heat of suffering and the pressure of years, they reach a threshold. They withdraw the warmth that has always dissolved the sharp edges of others' shadows. They become ice, crystalline, reflective. In Jungian terms, they embody the archetype of the wise one, the mirror of truth, the one who no longer identifies with the role of healer or rescuer, but with a deeper archetypal necessity of confrontation with the shadow. This shift is terrifying for those who depended on the empath's warmth, for it strips away the veil of denial. We must ask, Why does the narcissist fear this mirror so deeply? Because the narcissist lives in flight from the shadow. Their entire psychic structure is organized around denying the wound at the center of their being. Their charm, their seduction, their manipulation are all strategies to avoid the unbearable pain of insignificance and abandonment. When the silent empath turns cold, they cease to offer refuge from that wound. The narcissist is exposed to the raw archetypal truth. The wound cannot be outrun, it must be faced, and in that moment, the empath is no longer a victim, but a herald of individuation, calling forth the other to encounter themselves as they are. But we must not romanticize this coldness as a simple act of empowerment. It is a deeply painful process for the empath as well. To turn cold is to withdraw from patterns that once defined their very sense of identity. The empath has long equated love with self-abandonment, compassion with endurance of suffering, and silence with survival. To suddenly reverse this, to become a mirror rather than a sponge, requires immense psychic transformation. It requires the empath to confront their own shadow, to see that their endless giving was also a strategy, a way to avoid facing the fear of rejection, the terror of being unloved if they cease to give. Their coldness then is not only a defense, but also a birth. It is the crystallization of a new self, one no longer chained to the compulsive repetition of sacrifice. Here we touch upon the archetype of the self, the organizing principle of wholeness within the psyche. Individuation demands that each of us, whether empath or narcissist, confronts the shadow, integrates what was denied, and allows the deeper self to emerge. The empath's coldness is an initiation into this process. It is the refusal to collude with the lies of others, but also the refusal to perpetuate their own. The silence that once meant I will endure now means I will no longer betray myself. And this reversal shifts the entire dynamic of power. The empath is no longer a passive container, but an active mirror of truth. Consider the dream image of a frozen lake. At first, one sees only the surface, smooth, glimmering under the moonlight, but beneath the ice lies depth, movement, hidden life. The narcissist fears this frozen surface because it no longer gives them immediate access to the depths they once exploited. They are forced to confront the surface as reflection. They see themselves distorted not by the empath's willingness to soothe, but by the stark clarity of stillness. And for the empath, that frozen lake is also a protective layer, a boundary that has been lacking. It is a way of saying, you may see your reflection here, but you cannot dive in and consume my depths any longer. In mythological terms, we could liken this transformation to the figure of Medusa. To look into her eyes is to be turned to stone, not because she's evil, but because she reveals the unbearable truth of one's own gaze. The silent empath, in their coldness, carries a similar archetypal force. They do not attack, they do not shout, they simply reflect with such clarity that the one before them can no longer escape themselves. To those who have lived by illusion, this is terrifying. To those who have fed on the energy of others, it is devastating. And yet, this confrontation is necessary for the possibility of redemption. For no one can move toward wholeness without first facing the truth of their own fragmentation. Let us not overlook the cosmic dimension of this. The empath, in withdrawing warmth, does not only act in personal defense, they become an agent of balance within the collective unconscious. For too long, the dynamic between empath and narcissist has perpetuated archetypal imbalance. The devouring mother and the hungry child, the sacrificing saint and the consuming tyrant. When the empath turns cold, they break this cycle. They say, through silence, the sacrifice ends here. In doing so, they release not only themselves, but also the archetypal pattern into a chance for transformation. The narcissist, left without fuel, must confront their own abyss, and while many will resist, some may finally begin the journey inward, towards the wound, toward the self. But we must also speak to the danger. Coldness can harden into bitterness, silence into isolation, reflection into refusal of connection. The empath must remain vigilant not to confuse boundary with exile, truth with vengeance. The archetype of the mirror is double-edged. It reveals, but it can also imprison if one stares too long. The empath's task is not to freeze forever, but to embody the capacity to choose, to give warmth when it is authentic, to withhold when it is demanded, to mirror without losing sight of their own humanity. Only then does the coldness become a phase of transformation rather than a permanent armor. And so I tell you, when the silent empath turns cold, the world shifts. The narcissist trembles not because the empath has become cruel, but because the mask has been stripped away. The mirror they once feared is now unavoidable. And for the empath, the frost is not an end, but a beginning. The crystallization of a new form of power, one rooted not in serving others at the expense of self, but in serving truth at the expense of illusion. This is individuation in action. Archetypal balance restored through the courage of silence. The coldness of the empath must be understood not merely as an interpersonal maneuver, but as an archetypal event in the unfolding drama of the psyche. It signals the end of one myth and the birth of another. For years, perhaps decades, the empath has played the role of the healer, the comforter, the silent one who bends under the weight of others' projections without complaint. In this role, they were unconsciously allied with the archetype of the martyr, believing that their sacrifice was love, that their endurance was compassion. Yet behind this selfless image lay an unspoken terror that if they ceased to give, ceased to soothe, they would be abandoned, unloved, forgotten. Thus, their warmth was not only generosity but also compulsion. They lived not from freedom, but from fear. The coldness, therefore, marks the moment when the mask of the martyr cracks and a deeper archetype presses forward from the unconscious. In alchemy, the phase of congelatio, the freezing, represents the solidification of a new form. It is not the end of transformation, but a necessary stabilization before the next dissolution. The empath's coldness is this congelatio, a freezing of the old pattern, a solidifying of boundaries that once were fluid to the point of non-existence. The narcissist, who depended on the empath's fluidity, experiences this as betrayal, as cruelty, as death. But in truth, it is birth, it is the empath's first act of true separation. The moment they step out of the endless cycle of consumption and sacrifice to the narcissist, it is unbearable. To the empath, it is salvation. Imagine a dream in which you are walking through a forest, carrying a lantern that lights the way for others. For years you have kept this lantern burning, though your own feet stumble in the dark. Then one night, the flame extinguishes, and the forest becomes silent. You are terrified, for without the light, how will others find their way? But then, in the silence, you notice something extraordinary, the stars above, brighter than you have ever seen, guiding you with a light not of your making. This is the dream of the empath turning cold. They set down the lantern of compulsive service and discover that guidance does not depend solely on their sacrifice. They find their own way by a greater light, the light of the self. The narcissist's fear of the cold empath is, in truth, the fear of the shadow. The mirror now reflects not admiration or compliance, but emptiness, futility, fragility. And yet, what the narcissist sees in that mirror is precisely what they have been running from all their lives: the wounded child within the unbearable shame, the terror of being insignificant. The empath, by refusing to provide the narcotic of affirmation, forces the narcissist to confront the archetype of the wounded child, the orphan, the abandoned one. For the narcissist, this confrontation is annihilating. For the empath, it is liberating, for they no longer collude with the other's denial. But we must not forget that the empath too is faced with a mirror in this coldness. They are forced to recognize their own complicity in the drama. For while it is tempting to portray the empath as purely innocent and the narcissist as purely guilty, the deeper reality is more complex. The empath has been drawn to the narcissist not by chance, but by archetypal magnetism. The unconscious seeks balance. The giver is drawn to the taker, the listener to the speaker, the healer to the wounded tyrant. This dance is sustained because both avoid their own shadow. The empath avoids the terror of selfishness, the fear of being unloved if they assert themselves. The narcissist avoids the terror of worthlessness, the fear of being unloved if their mask falls. Both collude in the illusion. When the empath turns cold, they break the pact. They choose to face their fear rather than sustain the pattern. In this way, they take a step toward individuation. The silence of the cold empath is not an absence of voice, but the presence of an unspoken truth. It says, I will not participate in the lie anymore. I will not betray myself to keep you comfortable. I will not play the role you have assigned me. This silence is powerful because it is archetypal. It echoes the silence of the desert fathers, the hermits, who withdrew from society not to punish the world, but to discover the self beyond it. It echoes the silence of dreams, where images speak without words, where truth is revealed in symbols rather than speeches. To the narcissist, this silence is unbearable because it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be seduced, flattered, or bullied. It stands as an immovable presence, like a mountain, like a mirror, like ice in one patient stream. I recall a figure who was once a gentle healer suddenly appearing with eyes of glass. The dreamer described the terror of looking into those eyes, for they reflected his own cruelty back at him. The healer's hands were no longer warm but cold as stone. And yet he felt in that coldness a strange mercy, for only then did he realize that his wounds could not be healed by consuming another's light. He would have to face himself. The cold empath, in life as in dreams, serves a similar function. They are not cruel, but merciful in their refusal. Their coldness is a mirror that saves both from the endless cycle of illusion. We may think of this as the archetype of the mirror, which stands at the threshold between illusion and truth. To look into this mirror is to risk shattering the false self. For the empath, the mirror reflects their own tendency to self-erasure, their own avoidance of rejection. For the narcissist, the mirror reflects their own emptiness, their own avoidance of shame. Both are confronted with the same question. Who are you when you are no longer defined by the other's gaze? This question is the beginning of individuation, the beginning of authenticity, the beginning of wholeness. Yet the coldness of the empath must eventually give way to something deeper. For to remain forever cold is to become imprisoned in defense, frozen in the posture of refusal. The task is not to remain ice, but to integrate the capacity for ice into the totality of the self. The true goal is not to destroy the narcissist, nor to remain forever distant, but to embody choice, to give warmth freely when it is authentic, to withhold when it is demanded, to reflect truth without abandoning compassion. This is the balance of individuation, the union of opposites, the emergence of the self as the axis of the psyche. Coldness, then, is a stage, a threshold, an initiation. Beyond it lies the possibility of a new form of relationship, one not based on consumption and sacrifice, but on authenticity and mutuality. The empath who has turned cold and then reawakened finds themselves profoundly changed. They no longer enter relationships to heal or to fix. They no longer confuse love with martyrdom. They no longer allow silence to mean submission. Their silence now is sacred, a container of truth. Their words are no longer given cheaply, but carry the weight of authenticity. Their warmth is no longer compulsion, but choice. They have moved from the archetype of the martyr to the archetype of the sage. From unconscious sacrifice to conscious truth. This transformation is not only personal but collective. For every empath who breaks the cycle, shifts the balance in the collective unconscious. They become a living symbol of individuation, a reminder that wholeness requires boundaries as much as it requires compassion. So when we ask what happens when the silent empath turns cold, we are not speaking of a mere shift in mood or behavior. We are witnessing an archetypal drama in which the mirror appears, the shadow is revealed, and the possibility of individuation arises. The narcissist trembles because their mask is threatened. The empath trembles because their identity is dissolving. Both stand at the threshold of transformation, though only one may choose to step through. The empath, by turning cold, chooses truth over illusion, self over compulsion, freedom over fear. And in this choice, they embody the very essence of the Jungian path, the courage to face the shadow, the willingness to endure the silence, and the faith that beyond the frost lies the self waiting to be born. When the empath grows cold, a silence descends upon the field of relationship that feels almost otherworldly. It is as if time itself halts, as if the familiar rhythm of giving and taking, of affirmation and demand has been interrupted by an invisible hand. To those who were accustomed to feeding on the empath's warmth, this silence feels like starvation. Yet for the empath, this very moment of withdrawal is a confrontation with their own soul, a crossing of the threshold into a deeper reality. They discover, perhaps for the first time, what it means to exist outside the gravitational pull of others' needs. And this discovery, while terrifying, is also ecstatic, for it reveals that beneath the compulsion to heal and to serve, there lies a self that has long waited in the shadows. This self is not sentimental. It is not interested in appeasing others or maintaining illusions. It is the axis of the psyche, the source of wholeness that insists on truth, even when truth is painful. When the empath steps into coldness, they step into alignment with this self. Their silence becomes a declaration that they will no longer be a stage for another's performance, nor a vessel for another's poison. They will be a mirror, and in that mirror, the archetypal truth will appear. The narcissist recoils, for to see oneself reflected without distortion is to confront the emptiness at the core. The empath trembles, for to stand firm in this role is to risk losing everything they once believed kept them safe. And yet both are drawn into the archetypal drama. Both are summoned to face what has long been denied. Think of the ancient myths in which heroes descend into the underworld. They do not descend to remain there, but to confront what lies hidden, to bring back what was lost, to integrate what was fragmented. The empath's coldness is such a descent. They no longer remain on the bright surface of endless giving. They descend into the cavern of their own neglected needs. They discover the skeletons of their own fears, the bones of childhood memories when love was conditional, when silence was survival, by turning cold, they are forced to feel their own hunger, their own thirst, their own unspoken rage, and though this descent is harrowing, it is also the beginning of individuation. For only by confronting what lies in the shadows can the empath emerge whole. The narcissist in this drama is also summoned to descend, deprived of the empath's energy. They are confronted with the abyss within themselves. They must face the archetype of the wounded child, the forgotten one, the shadow they have projected onto others for so long. Many will resist, clinging more desperately to illusions, seeking other empaths who will resume the pattern, but some, a few, will be forced to begin their own journey inward. They will find that the cold mirror, once despised, was in truth an invitation to awaken. In this way, the empath's coldness serves not only their own individuation, but also the potential awakening of those who once consumed them. The archetype of the mirror, though terrifying, is merciful. Let us imagine another dream. In the dream, a figure stands at a frozen river. On the other side is a house filled with warmth and light, but the river cannot be crossed, for it is covered in ice that cracks under every step. The dreamer realizes that to cross, they must crawl slowly, feeling each movement, testing each sound, risking the plunge into the icy depths. This dream belongs both to the empath and to the narcissist. The frozen river is the silence between them. The house on the other side is authenticity, connection not based on illusion but on truth. The crossing is dangerous, for it requires vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to face rejection, but without it, both remain stranded, one in self-betrayal, the other in emptiness. The coldness of the empath, then, is not a wall, but a river, a threshold that demands courage. To cross, the empath must understand, however, that coldness is not the final destination. To remain frozen forever would be to calcify, to harden into bitterness, to isolate oneself from the possibility of love. The task is integration, to hold the capacity for coldness as one holds the capacity for warmth, to choose freely rather than compulsively. This is the meaning of individuation. Not to destroy one pole of the psyche, but to reconcile opposites into a higher unity. The empath learns to give not from fear, but from authenticity. To withdraw not from vengeance, but from wisdom. The narcissist, if they awaken, learns to receive not from entitlement, but from humility. To reflect not false grandeur, but genuine being. The mirror becomes no longer an instrument of terror, but a window into the self. Consider the archetype of winter. In the cycle of nature, winter is not cruelty, but necessity. It is the season when the earth rests, when seeds lie dormant, when life conserves its strength for renewal. The empath's coldness is such a winter. It appears harsh, but beneath the frost new life is forming. The narcissist, accustomed to endless harvest, experiences this winter as death, but those who endure, who learn to live through the cold, discover that spring follows. Likewise, the empath, having turned cold, must eventually thaw not into the old compulsive warmth, but into a new conscious vitality. Their love becomes springtime, not because it is endless, but because it is chosen, rooted in truth. This process is not merely personal, but archetypal. In every age, in every culture, we see this drama repeated: the one who gives and the one who takes, the one who mirrors and the one who hides. It is enacted in myth, in religion, in art, the Christ figure who suffers for others, the trickster who exploits, the sage who withdraws into silence. These are not just stories, but mirrors of our own psyches. The empath who turns cold embodies an ancient archetypal necessity, the refusal to perpetuate imbalance, the insistence that wholeness cannot be built on illusion. Their silence echoes the silence of the gods before revelation, the silence that precedes transformation. And yet we must ask, what is revealed in this silence? It is the truth that love without boundaries is not love but consumption. It is the truth that empathy without discernment becomes self-destruction. It is the truth that silence without choice is oppression. But silence with choice is liberation. The empath discovers these truths in the coldness, and the narcissist is forced to confront them as well. In this way, the cold mirror becomes not only the fear of the narcissist, but also the salvation of the empath. For in turning cold, the empath learns at last that their worth is not measured by how much they give, but by the wholeness of their being. So, when the silent empath turns cold, the world trembles not because cruelty has entered, but because illusion has ended. The narcissist fears the mirror because it reveals what has been denied. The empath fears the mirror because it reveals who they truly are beyond the role of healer, but both are summoned into the same archetypal confrontation. The question is not whether the mirror appears, the mirror always appears, but whether one has the courage to look into it, to see the shadow, to endure the silence, to cross the frozen river toward authenticity. This is the path of individuation. This is the path of the soul. The moment when the empath turns cold is not merely a shift in personality, it is a psychic earthquake. For the narcissist, it is a collapse of the stage upon which they once acted with grandeur. For the empath, it is the shattering of an identity that has been carried like a sacred burden for most of their life. What follows is a silence that echoes with both terror and possibility. For in that silence, one begins to hear the voice of the self, a voice long drowned out by the clamoring needs of others. It whispers not of duty, not of sacrifice, but of wholeness. And this whisper is the most radical sound the empath has ever encountered. The cold empath is like the moon suddenly eclipsed, withdrawing its borrowed light to reveal the darkness behind. Those who relied on its glow stumble, searching for the light that once illuminated their path. But the empath, standing in eclipse, discover something profound. The light was never theirs to give endlessly. They, too, are part of the cosmic balance, and their energy is sacred, not inexhaustible. The coldness, then, is an act of reclamation. It is the empath saying to the world, "My soul is not a resource to be consumed without end. My silence is not permission. My stillness is not emptiness. It is the boundary where your illusion ends and my truth begins." This transformation carries within it the archetypal theme of death and rebirth, the empath's old self, the healer without end, the silent sufferer. The endless giver dies in the frost. And with this, death comes morning, for the empath has built their entire sense of identity upon this role. To abandon it feels like betrayal, as though they are turning against their very nature. Yet, the deeper truth is that they are not betraying themselves, but finally ceasing to betray themselves. Their coldness is fidelity to the self, the first act of loyalty to the wholeness within. From this death, a new form arises. The empath as sage, as mirror, as one who gives not out of fear, but out of freedom. The narcissist, confronted with this new form, experiences terror. They are faced with the archetype of the judge, the mirror that cannot be deceived, the eye that sees through masks. They rage, they accuse, they attempt to manipulate, but the mirror remains cold, unyielding. In that reflection, they see the wound they have avoided all their lives. They see the abandoned child within, the emptiness, the fragility, and for many, this is unbearable. They flee, seeking another empath, another source of endless affirmation. But the memory of the mirror haunts them. For once truth has been glimpsed, it cannot be entirely forgotten. And for a few, the mirror becomes the beginning of awakening. They realize that their survival no longer lies in feeding off others, but in turning inward, in facing the wound, in beginning the slow journey of individuation. Thus, the empath's coldness, though feared, can become the first step toward the narcissist redemption. For the empath, the danger now lies not in exploitation, but in isolation. To remain forever cold is to freeze into stone, to become Medusa rather than mirror. There is a temptation, after years of sacrifice, to swing to the opposite extreme, to shut out all warmth, to refuse all vulnerability, to believe that silence is safety and coldness is strength. But this too is illusion. The goal of individuation is not to abolish one pole, but to reconcile opposites, warmth and coldness, silence and speech. Giving and withholding, all must be integrated into the wholeness of the self. The empath's task is not to reject their capacity for compassion, but to purify it of compulsion, to transform it from servitude into authentic gift. Their coldness is thus a stage, not a destination, a necessary winter that prepares the ground for a new spring. And what does this new spring look like? It is the empath who can look into the eyes of another without losing themselves. It is the empaths who can listen deeply without absorbing poison, who can give freely without expectation, who can remain silent, not out of fear, but out of strength. Their love is no longer martyrdom, but revelation. Their silence is no longer suppression, but sacred presence. Their boundaries are not walls, but rivers, flowing and alive, guiding the energy of relationship in harmony rather than chaos. They become, in Jungian language, not merely a persona shaped by others' needs, but a self rooted in wholeness. They embody the archetype of the wise one who has descended into the shadow and returned with the gift of truth. The narcissist, too, if they endure the mirror, can find renewal. They may begin to peel away the mask, to encounter the child within, to feel the grief they have long avoided. This is not easy, for it requires the death of grandiosity, the surrender of illusions. But those who dare to endure this death find that beyond emptiness lies authenticity. They discover that love is possible not through domination, but through vulnerability, not through consumption, but through presence. In this way, even the narcissist can begin the path of individuation. Though it is a path fraught with trials, the empath's coldness then is not cruelty, but invitation. The archetypal summons to transformation. The collective dimension of this drama cannot be ignored in our world. Empaths and narcissists are not isolated individuals, but archetypal patterns enacted on a vast scale. We see it in families, where one member sacrifices endlessly while another consumes without gratitude. We see it in societies, where the vulnerable carry the burdens of the powerful. We see it in history, where the masses are drained by the illusions of tyrants. The empath turning cold is thus not only a personal awakening, but a collective symbol. It signals the refusal of the oppressed to collude with their oppressors, the refusal of the silent to sustain the illusion of the powerful. It is an archetypal rebalancing, a necessary frost that prepares the soil of culture for renewal. Yet, as always, the risk remains. Coldness can harden into hatred, silencing to despair, reflection into paralysis. The empath must remember that the goal is not to annihilate relationship, but to transform it. The narcissist must remember that the mirror is not death, but truth, and together they must face the question that lies at the heart of all individuation. Will you remain in illusion, or will you endure the shadow for the sake of wholeness? This question echoes in every soul, in every culture, in every age, and the answer determines whether we remain trapped in cycles of consumption and sacrifice, or move toward the balance of the self. So when the silent empath turns cold, it is the mirror that emerges, and in that mirror lies both terror and grace. For the empath, it is the end of self-betrayal and the beginning of authenticity. For the narcissist, it is the end of illusion and the possibility of awakening. For the world, it is a sign that the archetypes are moving, that the balance is shifting, that wholeness is calling us forward. This is not an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to individuation. And so I say to you, do not fear the coldness of the empath. See in it the reflection of your own shadow, the summons of your own self, the invitation to a deeper two-way life. For beyond the frost lies spring, beyond the silence lies truth, and beyond the mirror lies the wholeness of the soul.